they're undocumented immigrant mothers, that doesn't count.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is the Trump administration's unconstitutional legal position that birthright citizenship has been ended. So, it could also be that in their minds, even though, again, this is like brazenly unconstitutional, that if you had a child while you were here, that doesn't really count the same as a U.S. citizen. But, on the due process point, that the one other point I'll make about the Lauren Underwood clip that was noteworthy to me before we move on to the next piece is Lauren Underwood is moderate. She's like a moderate. She's not a progressive. She's a sort of like moderate, represents a suburban part of, I think, outside of Chicago. I think I'm remembering that correctly. In any case, Democrats clearly feel a lot more confident on the issue of immigration, especially now that they can point to these due process issues, the abuses against American citizens, and they seem to have been somewhat persuaded by the significant polling drop that Trump has suffered on these specific cases of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and what he's doing with El Salvador, and more broadly, the way that his approval rating on immigration has really sunk and he's now underwater. They seem to be much more comfortable and much more emboldened. And I think that's also, the Lauren Underwood exchange to me was emblematic of that as well.
Yeah, so the Underwood exchange was being passed around a lot by the left. Let's now roll this next clip, which has been passed around a lot by the right. We can take a look at it here.
3 children so far, likely more children. One of those children with cancer who was deported without the medication necessary to address that child's cancer. Again, a U.S. citizen. The lawyers have said that they were not given, the family was not given an opportunity to make plans for the kids.
When these, the specific cases that you're referencing with these children, it was the parents' choice to take their children.
And did ICE
which it is the
follow
policy
through
of the
on the
Trump
policy?
administration to keep families together.
Ma'am, reclaiming my time.
Okay, so Crystal, I think your theory has prevailed here that she's aware of these cases of U.S. citizen deportations, which, as far as I can tell, actually have involved children. That was the case of a 10-year-old girl with cancer who was getting treatment in the United States. Her family is non-citizen. They were coming back to get cancer treatments and were actually ultimately ended up being deported, as you heard Representative Escobar say there. A lot of these other children were really young. We're talking like toddlers. So the idea of them not being deported, the way some of the early media reports covered this, I think was genuinely misleading. So I get why the right is passing this clip around. But at the same time, there is this gray area where, as you say, they sort of have declared the end of birthright citizenship. Now Kristi Noem is saying it's their policy to keep families together. It's one of those like very weird circumstances for the administration to have to deal with and then go out and defend publicly, because they're not wrong that it would be like the crueler thing. If the parents want their children to come with them and the children are U.S. citizens, the much crueler thing would be to leave them in a detention center in the United States rather than being with their mothers. On the other hand, you then end up technically deporting U.S. citizens, but obviously at the request of their own families.
Well, at least in one of these instances, mom was being deported, dad was staying here, and they were engaged in dad was trying to keep custody of the child in the United States. And a judge said that the family was not given any sort of, ability to contest this deportation of the child. So it, really did go against the wishes, at least of one of the parents. And I mean, it's consistent with the way that they've executed the entire immigration policy, which is they just do what they want and they don't care about due process, even when you're talking about children who are U.S. citizens. And of course, the instance that she brings up there of a child who has cancer, who's receiving treatment here, is just outrageous to not make provision for that child's care and make sure that they're going to be okay as this process unfolds, et cetera. So I don't know. I don't really get why the right thought that this made Kristi Noem look good when you actually know the details of these situations, because obviously it is complex when you have a mom who is undocumented, a child who is a U.S. citizen. In many instances, mom probably would want to take the child, but not in all instances. And that's really what, we've seen play out with some of these cases. One other thing I wanted to point out that just is breaking as well is Marco Rubio had made this comment about how they want to expand their deportation into prison policy beyond just El Salvador. And we now have some reporting that they are going to start deporting immigrants likely this week to Libya's prison system. Another one that is notorious for sexual abuse and torture and horrific conditions. Some have described it as, quote unquote, a hellhole. So that appears to be, and of course, Libya itself is a war-torn country, in large part thanks to our own foreign policy there, partially ruled by effectively a warlord. It's, in any case, that appears to be the next place that they want to be able to ship immigrants to another prison system that is rife with horror and human rights abuses.
Yeah, and I wanted to put, definitely we'll be following that story if it develops or if it was something that was like randomly tossed out there. Sounds like it was a fairly serious proposal, so we'll obviously bring everyone updates on that. I wanted to get this next element B3 on the screen. Yoan Grillo has a great Substack. He reports from Mexico City, and I wanted to point out he has some updates from what Claudia Scheinbaum discussed at her Monday morning news conference. I know, Crystal, you and Glenn covered this on Monday. Scheinbaum gave her own description of the conversation she had with Donald Trump about troops. This is from Yoan, I'm quoting him. Trump said, "We want to help Mexico," and this is from Scheinbaum now. Trump said, "We want to help Mexico, and to help Mexico, we want to send troops if you need them." And I said, "No, President Trump, not this. We want to collaborate in many ways in line with our sovereignty and in the territory that each of us governs." And the reason that's worth mentioning here, and Yoan, as somebody who follows this really closely, mentions that Scheinbaum has rapidly changed the tone on migration, like crackdowns, since Lopez Obrador left office. The reason that this is worth highlighting is because Trump desperately needs Scheinbaum's cooperation, obviously, to continue with a lot of these crackdown type policies, which is why we saw the administration roll out this $1,000 self-deportation policy, because they know that these deportations are way more difficult. They've realized that these deportations are are not happening at a pace that are going to allow them to do the, quote, mass deportations that they promised on the campaign trail. So everyone probably is aware that DHS announced this week you can, via CBP Home, if you are a non-citizen, you can deport yourself and get a $1,000 voucher, which actually is cheaper than the legal process playing out per capita in the United States. But I wanted to bring up this post from Ruben Gallego. This is B4. He responded to that and said, "Why don't we make them pay a $5,000 fine, go through a background check, and give them a work visa for a few years, renewable with good behavior?" Noteworthy, Crystal, because I think Dems have definitely staked out a hard opposition to these Trump policies, but I sort of feel like there haven't been a ton of alternatives proposed. It's sort of like you're either Laken Riley or open borders. You're either on the Laken Riley Act, I should say, signing it with like a lot of kind of centrist Dems did with Republicans, or you're just like all in favor of opening up the borders, which, more power to maybe you and Ryan, but I don't think you're as far as Ryan on that camp. But
I'm getting there. I'm getting more radicalized every day, Emily.
But this is
Trump,
an interesting alternative.
Trump is the one who articulately points out, hey, these borders are just arbitrary lines drawn on a map. Like, what are we doing here?
Spot the lie.
Random line drawn on a map. Why do we care? No, I mean, listen, Gallego, who did vote for the Laken Riley Act, by the way, Democrats tried to, in the last administration, stake out this hawkish border position through their bipartisan immigration bill. But I think you're right that at this point, none of them are open borders. That's just, there's none of them that are open borders, actually. But I think that anybody who is, even slightly progressive they're happy to attack the Trump administration, but I don't know that they've landed yet on where they want to specifically be. And I think that'll be fleshed out a lot probably in the next presidential election is when we'll see more specifics about what that plan actually looks like. I mean, to speak to the Trump self-deportation piece, this is their major program.